everyone, Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm. It is a beautiful day outside. It's Tuesday, I don't even know what date it is, but all I know is that it is already 70 degrees. It's 11:30 a.m. I actually came out around 8:30 a.m. to start pulling some tulips because it is going to be hot. It's already been hot, and I thought I would actually do a video about my experience with field grown tulips. Now, if you've been following me, you'll know that I've been doing a lot of tulips through winter foresting, primarily through hydroponics. So if you're not following me, follow me on Instagram because every day I do real-time updates on that process and just, what types of varieties are coming in and all that good stuff. But I have a lot more tulips in the field than what I had originally planned on having. And a lot of it was due to the fact that I got bulbs. Well, I would say that I ordered about 75% of my bulbs from a single supplier. I asked them to hold them for me for a couple of months in cool storage. And when they shipped them to me, a lot of them were not in great condition for forcing. So into the field they went. And so I have a couple thousand tulips in the field. And yeah, I wanted to talk about just, what I'm doing, harvesting, my experience, what I'm gonna do next time. So if you've watched my other videos, you already know this might be the first and the last time that I'm actually going to grow field grown tulips, and I'll go a little bit more into detail about that. But first, let me show you what's going on in the field. So I just checked the date. It's April 11th, and even though I've never grown tulips before, I can tell you that this is definitely an expedited tulip season in the sense that we should not have so many blooming right now, but it is what it is, right? And what you're seeing here right now is what it should look like. Just green, not a ton of blown open tulips. If I had videotaped this morning, it would have been a lot more color. So what I'm going to try to do in the next hour or so is harvest these types of call it kissing stage. So this is a perfect time to harvest for a single, especially if you want to hold it for a few days, even up to a couple of weeks. With this hot sun, these are going to blow open in a few hours, and you want to prevent that from happening. Now, this is Mystic Van Eyck. These, I believe, are Columbus. Moral of the story is label your tulips, because I had no idea what was coming up until they started blooming. But these Columbus, look a little bit short, so I'm a little bit nervous. But we'll see what happens because they can always go into jars. These are super parrots. I always get super and silver confused because I think silver is the pink one, even though it's silver in the name. But yeah, you can see that the stem length is also a little bit on the shorter side. These I knew did not receive their full cooling when I got them in December, because when I forced them, they were so short. So I don't know how much the cooling naturally did outside because we had such a mild winter. And then here's also some more Columbus over here. What I do want to note is that pulling tulips is going to look different between when it's a single versus a double, right? So this is perfect to be pulled. This here is a double. This is called an icon. And what I found is that, yes, you can hypothetically pull it here, but you kind of want to give it a little bit more time. This is the earliest stage at which I would pull it. And, I've actually already pulled the other ones that are at the optimal stage, but because it is so hot, I will be pulling these two over here, and I'll probably give these a couple more hours before I pull them later in the day. So I've got a bunch of the icons over here. Let me show you. Look at my sea holly. They're looking so good. So excited. Some more singles over here. These are all at the kissing stage, ready to be harvested. To be honest, these are later or lower priority. This is Alibi. I mean, it's a really pretty tulip, but the stems are kind of short. It's a single. So I'm prioritizing by double first, or parrot double, and then singles. Here is another double. These are ready to be pulled right now. If not, giving them a couple of more hours. These are definitely ready to be pulled. And this is me giving this a couple of hours. This over here looked like this about 2 hours ago. So that's how quickly the sun is blowing these open. So more over here. And then I've also got some parrots that I just pulled before. And what I've learned about parrots is that you definitely want to wait a little bit longer. Like, you know, this over here, you could pull it, but I'm going to give it a little bit more time. The longer you wait for parrots to pull, obviously you don't want them to be full blown open, but you want them to get a little bit more color. And it also helps bulk up the head size when you wait. So, you know, right now this doesn't look like much, but you give it a couple more hours, it is going to get a little bit bigger and a little bit more color. So that brings me to my first learning growing tulips for the first time in the field this year. And that is that pulling or growing tulips is honestly a bit of a time luxury, in the sense that if you work a full-time job, I think it's unrealistic to plant a couple or a few thousand tulips in the field and expect that you're going to be able to harvest all of them on time. So because I am on maternity leave, I have the luxury of coming out, you know, whenever the baby's not feeding or crying. But if I were at work, you know, maybe I get a chance in the morning, a chance in the evening. But if I hit 80-day or 80-degree days, then I'm kind of screwed, because I can't come out in the height of the afternoon or, you know, midday to come out and pull them. And so I think I would actually lose a lot in that scenario. So, you know, a lot of that is completely out of your control. You don't know what kind of days you're going to get in April. So no one would have thought we would get 3 consecutive days in the 80s, but here we are. So it makes me really nervous to plant more tulips next year, because I feel like that when I go back to work with then a toddler, it's going to be even harder to have that time management to be able to pull tulips at this time. Another thing I wanted to talk about was these. These are clearly not tulips. These are actually lilies. Now, before I went out, or before I gave birth, I actually took the lily workshop last minute, because I wanted a focal for the co-op that I'm selling at. And the reason why I'm talking about lilies right now is because, you know, lilies, if you're trying to program them, you want to get them in every couple of weeks. So luckily I had already prepared these crates beforehand, before I gave birth. And I have a lot more crates that I need to put out there, because I have a lot more tulips that need to go in. So Eric's gonna help me shovel compost into the crates, and then that way I don't have to do that kind of heavy lifting. But the reason why this is relevant is because trying to get in tulip, or trying to get in lilies, plus harvesting the tulips, plus processing the tulips, which means washing them, bunching them, storing them, is really a lot of work. So if I would do it again next year, I probably would not be ordering lilies in April to put into the ground or into crates. Let's now talk about harvesting. So where possible, if I know I need to store, I'm trying to harvest with the bulb on. Now, it's kind of hard to tell from here, but I do have more clay-ish soil. So one of the learnings I had was don't bury your bulbs too deep. Now, you also don't want to bury them too shallow, but you don't want to bury them so deep that it becomes hard for them to pull out. So when I had planted my tulips, I would say I started from all the way back there and then was planting down this row. So the tulips back there are planted a lot more deeply into the soil. And so when I'm harvesting these tulips, I can't get the bulb. And especially right now, I don't want to, exert myself too much, but I am basically just getting the stem. And then as I work my way down here, I started realizing that I was planting them a little bit too deep. And when I say too deep, I was probably going below 8 inches. So I would say that here I was probably planting around like 5 inches. And you can see that it is a lot easier for me to get the bulb on. And this makes a huge difference in terms of storage, because now I can use these tulips for my CSA in about a week and a half. But if I'm pulling with just the stem, yeah, I could hold it for a week and a half, but I feel like the vase life does get a bit compromised. So I'm less willing to use those stems for later on and less likely to want to hold them a bit longer. So here's all the tulips that I harvested this morning. I would say I harvested nearly just as many yesterday. The fridge is about to run out of room. And previously I was just putting these in the fridge in buckets like this. But now, because I need more space, I'm gonna put them into crates and I'll show you how I am doing that. But yeah, this is a lot more tulips than I anticipated would come in at this time right now. All right, so let's talk about storage, which is a topic that I am continuously learning and evolving. So I've done plenty of other videos talking about storage, but I want to talk about just field grown tulip storage, which, you know, conceptually is the same, but in details, there is a little bit of, I guess, like a difference, right? So in my last video where I talked about my Easter sales and all that stuff, I had processed the tulips by washing them. And I washed them because I was putting them vertically into buckets into the refrigerator. Hold up, the baby is crying. I'm back. All right, so as I was saying before, this is an ever evolving process. So yesterday I processed the tulips, I cleaned them. Today I am not going to do that. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off these like daughter leaves, and then I'm going to put them into the crate just like this, because here we go. I'm gonna finish my sentence though, but the reason why I'm not cleaning these is because I want them to be dry when they are in the refrigerator, so that there is no mold or rot that could potentially happen. So these are just going to go straight in. They're relatively clean in the sense that, you know, I try to get as much of the dirt off of them as possible. So yeah, they'll go into a crate like this. And of course I line the bottom of the crate with a cardboard insert, so therefore it doesn't get the fridge dirty. All right, so look at that. These are all here and done. Now, one thing to note is that I am only storing the ones that are more or less in that kissing stage. So for example, I would not store this one. This one I would try to use ASAP. It's just about to open. Now, I've had experience with, this is Mystic Van Eyck. It will open pretty fully and then it will close again at night and it will open. So still be good vase life. But this is what I would put into storage, and this will store for at least a week and a half at this point. And I could probably bring this to a good 2.5 weeks and feel comfortable about that. It is 5:30 p.m. I have come out here so many times today. I don't even know how many tulips I pulled, but let me show you what the current state looks like. So again, the goal is to keep this as green as possible without too much color. These are definitely gonna blow open tomorrow, I know it. And I'm gonna be at the market, and then I have a doctor's appointment. And yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I might come out and try to pull some in the morning before I leave for the market. But yeah, I mean, as of right now, I'm pretty happy with where this is right now. I've officially run out of fridge space. So a lot of these are just staying in my basement in a bucket. And the basement runs at mid 50s. So not the end of the world, not the greatest, but yeah. And we'll see what happens tomorrow. Hey guys, it's April 13th and it is just around 8 a.m. So we've still been harvesting tulips, and I'll show you the state of what everything looks like. Today we're gonna hit 87 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow's another day of 87 degrees. So for the most part, again, I've been able to keep most things quite green. There were a couple of parrots that kind of blew and I just left them in. But yesterday I went to my market and got back around noon and basically like immediately came back and started pulling more tulips. So one other thing that I think is worth talking about is having staggered or using different varieties to basically stagger the bloom time. Now there's early tulips, there's mid-season tulips, there's late season tulips. And my experience is that they buy you a few days in hot weather like this. They're not gonna buy you weeks like they normally should. So I'll give you an example. This here is called Lorenzo. Lorenzo is actually what they call an early double. Doubles typically take a little bit longer to mature than something like a single. So a really good example of an early single is these guys over here, which is kind of hard to tell what they're going to look like. But this is Mystic Van Eyck. The Van Eycks are, they're a Darwin, and they are early bloomers. They are one of the first to bloom, and this was very true. So these were definitely the first to color up. The Alibi, which is a Triumph, Triumph is also a relatively early one. And sometimes you can tell this by the number of cooling weeks that they need. So both of these need less cooling time. This over here is Foxy Foxtrot. It's a bit more of a mid-season type of bloom. We've got some Columbus over here, which is also the same. It's a double, and you can tell that these are actually coming in a lot later than some of the other ones that I had harvested. So one thing that I'm also noticing this year is that because I planted a variety of treated versus untreated bulbs, and when I say treated, I mean whether or not they were cooled. So for those of you who don't know, bulbs can come cool to you or pre-chilled, and the choices are 9 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Celsius, or untreated, so completely not cooled. Now, if you live in a southern climate, you definitely want to consider something like potentially a 5C. If you live in a mid-range type of climate, or even where I live in New Jersey, where the winters are getting a little bit more mild, you might want to consider something like 9C. So getting a little bit less of or how do you say, warmer temperature, right? Because 9 degrees Celsius is a little bit warmer than 5 degrees. They're chilled for a little bit longer, and it definitely buys you a little bit of buffer in case if you have a mild summer. Now, the reason why this is relevant is because I found that my 5C bulbs that went into the ground were the first ones to pop up, especially the ones that were early flowering. So a good example one is Cabana Parrot. Cabana Parrot is actually a 5C bulb that I got, and I was able to hydroponically force successfully before Christmas. That was the first tulip that came up. The second one was Icun. Icun is a double, and it typically is like a mid to later type of double. And yet those also came up first, and I think it's because they were pre-chilled and they had great stem length. So then after, the next flower that flowered, or the next tulip that flowered, was the Mystic Van Eyck that I just showed you. That one did not get any pre-cooling. That one was completely unchilled, and that one went straight into the ground, and it still produced relatively long, sturdy stems. But because it is a earlier flowering variety, that one flowered first amongst all of the untreated. Now, this is actually consistent with some grower friends who are near me who are just seeing their tulips pop up now, including a few people who live just like half an hour away, and their climate is a little bit more warm and mild than mine, and they were not getting tulips until basically yesterday or today. So it goes to show you that if you use some pre-treated or pre-cooled bulbs, you might be able to get tulips a little bit earlier, and this might be a good way to stagger succession planting without needing row cover, shade cloth, and all that stuff. I had to adjust the baby here, but you may be wondering, how do you get pre-cooled bulbs? Well, if you order wholesale from any bulb distributor, typically they will actually chill the bulbs for you for free, or if they charge, it's a very nominal cost of like 1 or 2 cents per bulb. I think it is totally worth going for, especially if you're going to buy wholesale and you live in that kind of moderate to mild climate where you're not sure if you're going to get a true winter, because the last thing you want is to buy all of these bulbs, spend anywhere from, I don't know, 20 to 50 cents a bulb, and then have them come up short. So pre-cooling is something that I will probably look into, and if I buy any untreated, it will predominantly go for hydro forcing, because I will be chilling them myself in the refrigerator. So we are on day 3 of our heat wave. It's already 75 degrees outside. I just spent the last hour harvesting. When it rains, it pours. So not only did all the tulips come in, but my fridge broke. So the freezer still works and the fridge part doesn't. So there's a couple of reasons why that could be. So we shut off the fridge to just, see if that might actually help restart it. But that means that I have a lot of tulips that are sitting in like 58 to 60 degree temperature in my basement. But let me show you what it looks like when you grow too many tulips for what you can sell. And, you know, I would like to think of myself as being somewhat responsible for having cultivated some outlets, right? I'm selling at the florist market. I'm selling to the CSA group, which is 5 people. And then I'm selling retail online. So it's not like I don't have any customers, but this is what happens when, you know, close to 1,000 tulips come into bloom. So these were the tulips in the fridge. I mean, for the most part, they're actually still looking okay because I've been putting ice into these buckets. Oops, there's an ice cube stuck over here. Some of these still have bulb on, but look at this. So I've got 2 crates worth, more over there. Luckily, these are going out today. These are actually bonus bouquets for my CSA members since I had so many tulips. We've got more over here. This is actually going out this afternoon. These are buckets that I am selling for. So I'm selling buckets of tulips. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the financial breakdown. And then luckily this is the functioning fridge and it is jammed packed, and I'm going to continue jamming it because you can actually wrap bouquets like this and put it here temporarily for like 48 hours and it'll be fine. So yeah, the name of the game is to harvest as fast as possible and move them as fast as possible. So I've been offering delivery to try to get these to move, and the delivery seems to be working. And I'm also doing a special where normally these are $20 each, but I'm doing 2 for $35 instead of $40. It is now later in the day and I pulled a lot of tulips, as you saw. And then I went on my delivery run and then came back and sorted through and put as many in the fridge as possible. And I want to show you a new storage technique. I feel like this is an ever evolving craft. So I've been experimenting with storage basically since January to get ready for Valentine's Day. And I had a feeling that something like this was going to happen. But someone online suggested I use lunch bags, and genius idea. So let me show you. So this is the fridge that finally works now, thank God. These all have the bulb on, and so I use a lunch bag to put them in. So we've got 2 crates that are stacked full. I mean, there's a ton in here. And then what I did was any ones that didn't have the bulb, I basically wet a paper towel, put a rubber band on, and then, yeah, stuck it in here. So let me actually turn this to colder. But it's, yeah, I feel a lot more relieved right now. The only thing that I wasn't able to fit were these parrots. And what I realized was that the fridge here is actually not as tall as the other fridge. I would have been able to fit this crate. So I might actually rejigger a bit. But for today, I'm done. You can see how many parrots I pulled. There's some going horizontal over here, some vertical over here. And I pulled them basically right before they were ready. So even if I store them here in the basement, it's high 50s in here, they're gonna mature and it's gonna be fine because the bulb is obviously on with these guys. Last but not least, we still have this fridge over here, and again, I stuffed it with more bouquets. So yeah, this is it for now. And I think hopefully for tomorrow, the weather's going to start getting a little bit more cool. It's going to rain, so there's going to be a break, but most of the tulips outside are harvested, and this is actually going out tonight. So trying to move as many stems as possible. All right, the last thing before we wrap up is for my mental health. I am going to let these b.a.r.e perennialize. So b.a.r.e is a Darwin hybrid, as I mentioned before, and that actually makes it really great and more likely for it to perennialize successfully. So I've got a patch over here, and you know, I love b.a.r.e, so I wouldn't mind having again next year. It'll also be good for the pollinators. And then if I walk all the way over here, you know, as I'm walking, it's just crazy how much green there is now. Like how much the heat accelerated all of the stuff that I overwintered. But if I walk over here, I've got more b.a.r.e as well as now alibi. And I will also let these perennialize. Alibi is a triumph, so also likely to perennialize successfully. And I'm calling it quits basically for now. So I will say that all of this is basically done for now. You know, I'll probably pull a couple of parrots here and there, and then there's some Columbus down there that I'll pull. But yeah, this is it. I'm not gonna pull anymore. I'm done. I'm out of freezer space. I have more tulips that I need to push for the next couple of weeks. The fridge buys me quite a bit of time. So there's some, you know, more coveted varieties here. Like there's the Columbus, which I actually have pre-sold bunches of for the market next week. But other than that, I am pretty happy where we ended up. And then this was actually a bit of a surprise. This is Sweet Simone over here, and I forced these tulips, their fringes, they're a lot smaller coming out of the ground versus when I forced them. There are some aphids on these already, so I'm also just gonna let them go, and I will pull these up. So yeah, these are not going to perennialize, but it's time to move on from tulips. And this is what the end of the 2023 spring tulip season looks like. Some color, but not a ton. And it is crazy to me that there were literally about 500 parrots here yesterday that I harvested all at once in the morning. And so yeah, I'm pretty happy. The only thing I need to do, and I have time for this, is I need to dig up all the bulbs that I did not get out, because if I don't dig them up, I'm gonna get a lot of leafy green growth, and I don't want that, especially if I overwinter other stuff. So yeah, pretty happy with where I ended up, especially a week and a half, 2 weeks postpartum. I don't necessarily feel like I pushed myself physically. It was honestly more of a mental challenge than anything else. So to wrap up this video, there are 3 considerations that I want to talk about, and this is particularly relevant if you are a beginner type of flower farmer, if you're doing this as a side hustle. The first one is that tulips are not probably a flower you want to grow in mass if you are that side hustle farmer. So when I say in mass, I'm saying, you know, you're growing in excess of 1,000 tulips. I think that a few hundred is definitely manageable. I might cap it to like 400 or 500 tulips. But if you work a full-time job and, you know, you can't have flexible time to either work remotely, or you can't just take a day off here or there, I would definitely consider either getting help or scaling down the amount that you're growing, because if you hit a heat wave like we did this week, you will basically have all of your tulips blow open. And the second point here is that if you don't have a fridge that is dedicated to tulips, you are also going to be in huge trouble. So ideally you have like a walk-in cooler, but a lot of us obviously don't have that luxury. I have 2 spare fridges that we got for free from people who were looking to just get rid of their fridges, and I ran out of space there. And I would say that each fridge, you know, I'm obviously able to store a few hundred tulips. Now, maybe I could have done a better job of, in that second fridge, instead of keeping them in buckets, wrapping them, storing them, all that stuff. All that stuff takes a lot of time. So again, if you're working a full-time job, you have other obligations like a kid, a family, you know, you're spending a lot of time harvesting, then you've got to process it, you've got to wrap it, you've got to store it, you've got to sell it. It's a lot, right? So just something to think about there. And then the third piece of that is, if you're growing in mass, you need to have some sort of sales outlet. And again, for me, I feel like despite having, I call it like 3 sales outlets, it still does not feel like it's enough to push out all of these stems. Now, that being said, there are plenty of established farmers who can't seem to grow enough tulips to meet the demand. So the demand is there, you just have to find it, but it's just very hard being in year 2 to have cultivated that kind of demand to move out like 1,000 stems at once. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that field tulips are definitely, you know, not what great looks like. And this is in the context of field tulips versus hydroforcing. So I've said this before, but next year I am not going to purposefully plant or order bulbs for field planting. Obviously I have some perennializing outside. I think that they should definitely be able to come back because I'm not going to cut them at all. The leaves will be able to photosynthesize, but the only field tulips I'm going to plant are the ones where the bulbs look a little bit questionable for hydroforcing. And this is because field tulips do not command that kind of price premium that hydroponics do. So first of all, everyone is growing field tulips. Every tulip is coming in right now for everyone. So obviously there's a market saturation in terms of supply. And then the second thing is that harvesting is a pain in the butt, right? Like I obviously need to make sure that I'm able to get the bulb up. There's dirt on the bulb. I have to wash it. Ideally, I engage in something called no-till tulips, which is where you kind of just plant tulips on the surface and then you put additional compost or soil on top, and that makes it a lot easier for you to pull up. But at the same time, you still do need to wash those stems versus for hydroforcing, there's no washing needed whatsoever. And one thing I do want to point out is that some people have asked if you can plant in crates and, you know, kind of have the no-till method there. Unless if the crate is going into the ground, I would advise against that, especially in a zone like mine. So I live in zone 6B. You might be able to get away with that if you're like in zone 8 or zone 9. I wouldn't go beyond zone 8 in terms of cooler temperatures to do that, because crates have ventilation on the sides, right? There's holes. So what that means is that the soil temperature is much more subjective to fluctuations in temperature. So meaning that's going to go through that freeze thaw cycle more rapidly than if it was in ground. So what you risk doing is rotting your bulbs if you do that in a very cold climate where you're going to get freezing and then non-freezing temperatures, freezing, non-freezing temperatures. So yeah, next year if I plant, I'm going to try, if possible, to do the no-till method, assuming I have enough compost and soil to be able to layer on top. The final thing I want to talk about is sales. I'm actually not going to talk too much about numbers here because eventually I will do a wrap-up video on tulips as a whole in terms of how much money I made. But couple of things to talk about sales here. So one really interesting thing is that, you know, selling at a florist co-op is definitely great in the sense that if you have a lot, you can bring it to the market floor, and there's also pre-orders. So typically what happens is for my co-op, we list the stems that we will have. This means that you have to project what you're going to have a week in advance. Florists and whoever else comes to buy can pre-order in advance. That usually makes up about half the orders. And then when they come pick up day of, there's a market floor where they can also buy stems. So, you know, what I learned is that I didn't necessarily have the right colors for florists. I have a lot of reds and oranges, and that's not necessarily because I chose reds and oranges. It's because it was just what was available. I ended up buying 4 crates on sale, 2 of which had a lot of reds and oranges. Reds and oranges do not do well with florists, and this should be no surprise, especially with the florists that come to our co-op, because they're doing a lot of event work, especially like wedding events. So they're looking for more blush tones, whites, that kind of stuff. So that being said, you know, I haven't sold as many as I had anticipated. In fact, for next week's market, I pre-sold basically all the pinks. I pre-sold Columbus. I pre-sold some Mystic Van Eycks. So it goes to tell you that color makes a huge difference, especially when it comes to florist outlet. Now, retail, I've been able to sell the oranges and the reds, but that's because I've been doing the mixed bouquets. So one other thing is that I refuse to go down in price. You know, could I move all those tulips right now if I severely discounted them? Absolutely. I'd be more inclined to do that if I didn't have a customer base already that was buying from me. I think it's very unfair to my CSA customers, as well as people who have consistently bought bouquets from me that average anywhere from $1.80 to $2.50 a stem. Even in the past couple of weeks, for me to then drop the price dramatically. So, you know, having a fridge gives you a bit of leeway in terms of time to sell those stems, but I would honestly rather donate those stems than come down in price, because now you're setting an expectation for certain people to wait for that sale. And then the second piece is that you are making it unfair for other people who have paid the right price for you, and then you're potentially undercutting other flower farmers. So I had mentioned before that, most of the time I sell bouquets for $20. So in the winter, that's like 8 or 9 stems for $20. During this time of year when it's field grown tulips, it's basically 10 to 12 stems for $20. So my CSA customers get basically 13 stems in a bouquet for $20. Now, what I did was I did have a sale. So if you bought 2 bouquets, it'd be $35. And then I started selling a bucket of blooms. So basically 30 stems for $45. And that hovers anywhere from like $1.50 to like $1.65 a stem going that route. And just through 4 customers yesterday, I was able to sell $120 worth yesterday, right? Now, again, if I lower that price down to like $10 for, let's say, like 12 stems, I could probably move them a lot faster, but just not fair, right? So when I think about just, the sales outlets and the pricing, I want to make sure that I'm getting at least close to $1.50 per stem, whether that is the florist or the retail route. Ideally, the florist gets the lowest price, and then, retail goes a little bit up from there. But obviously, it is completely dependent on where you live and what your demand looks like and all that stuff. So in any case, now all of the harvesting is done, or the pulling of the tulips is done. And now we are on to pushing those tulips. So I have a market again on Wednesday. I have some pre-committed stems for that market, as well as for another florist who doesn't go to that market. And I have some orders from retail customers, and I'm gonna continue trying to push these stems on Facebook Marketplace, using a sale, but still adhering to that guideline of around $1.50 a stem. So if you went through Tulip Hell like me over the past week, let me know what your experience was like. I know that on the other side of the country, especially in the Pacific Northwest, people got snow. And so it could be a lot worse, because if you got snow and you had budding tulips, chances are those tulips were donezo. So at least we got to harvest and we get some time to sell them. Out in the Pacific Northwest, some people lost their entire tulip crop, which is really heartbreaking, especially because tulips are not cheap to source in terms of bulbs. But anyway, let me know if you have any questions, what your experience was like if you went through Tulip Hell, and I will see you in the next video.